but I'll bore you now with a bit of talk about our budget in Canada and where we are and where we're going. It's good to see Premier Harris here. It's good to see councillors from the City of Toronto here. We made a very important step, a permanent step in Canada yesterday when we announced that the sharing of the federal gas tax will be permanent. This is a major step forward. I'm departing from what I'm supposed to talk about here, but it's a major step forward. The Mayor of Montreal, in the Monsieur Tremblay, in the pre-budget consultations, talked to me specifically about this, how important it was to the municipalities to have permanence so they could plan ahead. It's just like business. It's the ability to plan ahead with certainty in terms of funding for municipal infrastructure in Canada. And we provided that certainty yesterday to our municipalities, large and small, across Canada. C'est avec plaisir que je suis ici aujourd'hui pour vous parler de notre troisième budget. Il s'agit d'un budget équilibré qui prépare le Canada et les Canadiens à relever les défis économiques à venir. C'est aussi le troisième budget équilibré de suite de notre gouvernement. And it is a pleasure to be here this morning. It is our third budget as the Government of Canada. Somebody asked me yesterday, are you surprised it's the third budget? Yeah, I am. If somebody had asked me 2 years ago, would you do 3 budgets and 2 economic statements, I would have bet against that. I would have thought it was unlikely. They asked me this morning, are you surprised that the official opposition party is going to support the budget? Yes, I am, I suppose, because they brought me a shopping list. And they said, we want you to spend billions of dollars on A, B, C, D, E, and F. And we're not doing it. But they're supporting the budget anyway. I thank them for their support. It's important that they think this through and that they support the important steps that we're taking in terms of our economic plan for Canada. And it is a plan. We took office in 2006. I'm going to go back to my text eventually, but we took office in 2006, and there was not an economic plan for Canada. And we developed an economic plan for Canada in 2006. It's called Advantage Canada. For those of you who wonder where we're going, it's on the website. It sets out exactly what we intend to accomplish in office as the Government of Canada: an entrepreneurial advantage, a fiscal advantage, a tax advantage, an infrastructure advantage, a knowledge advantage for Canada. And the steps we took yesterday were just additional steps in implementing that plan for our country. It will result in our country having a higher quality of life and a higher standard of living as we go forward. So then, what did we do yesterday? The most important thing we did yesterday was the continuity, the cumulative effect. We saw the slowdown coming in the United States. This is important. There is also global credit insecurity. We have our own challenges in Canada with asset-backed commercial paper. As you know, Purdy Crawford is leading the table in Montreal that's been working on that issue with some degree of success, which is important. But we also see the slowdown in the U.S. housing sector in particular, which is in recession in the United States. We saw it early on. We saw it last year. That's why we acted last year in order to create a stimulus for the Canadian economy. What is that stimulus? The stimulus is 1.4% of our GDP. It's huge. It's about $21 billion. When does it take effect? It takes effect now. It started January 1st. On October 30th, in the economic statement, we made retroactive many of our tax reductions, and we made historic business tax reductions for Canada on October 30th, which began on January 1st, 2008. We're going to reduce the federal business taxes in Canada to 15% by 2012. We encourage the provinces to get to 10% by 2012. I'm thrilled that Carol Taylor, the Minister of Finance in the province of British Columbia, and Premier Campbell there have moved in that direction last week. The province of Alberta is already there. I encourage, I plead the Government of Ontario to move in that direction. The Government of Ontario today has the highest taxes on new business investment in the country. This is at the same time that the current Premier of Ontario says that he's worried about business. Well, if you're worried about business, business doesn't need Band-Aids. Business needs long-term structural change, like they're doing in British Columbia, like they're doing in Alberta. My goodness, the taxes on new business investment in Quebec are 50% lower today than they are in the province of Ontario. So this has to be fixed. And I'm going to continue to plead with the province in their budget, when they do their budget this spring, to provide some relief to businesses in the province of Ontario, if they're sincere in their concern about this province, my home province, the province in which I was treasurer for a time, thanks to Premier Harris. And it was a time, going back to then, 2001, 2002, of some limited economic growth, about 1.5%, as I recall, real growth in GDP in 2001, 2002 in the province of Ontario. So when I heard yesterday some of the critics saying, well, you're running the surplus close to the line, I've seen this movie before. We've done this before. We have the ability in government, some might not believe this, but we do have the ability in government to control spending. We do have the ability to reduce taxes. We've done both in the Government of Canada under the leadership of Prime Minister Harper over the course of the past 2 years. And this is important in terms of preparation. As I say, we knew that there would be an economic slowdown in the United States eventually. It is now happening, and we took the steps, the important steps in terms of reducing taxes, paying down debt, making sure that we in Canada were prepared for this economic slowdown. In fact, when I was in Tokyo 2 weeks ago at the G7 finance ministers meeting, and when I was in Davos at the World Economic Summit, and when I meet with my colleagues internationally in the emerging economies, I'm proud as a Canadian to be able to say that we have the strongest economic fundamentals in the G7. We're the only country in the G7 that is running a surplus, that is reducing taxes at the same time, and that is paying down public debt. When I describe this to my colleagues, the other finance ministers in the G7, I can tell you they look at Canada with tremendous respect because we have our economic fundamentals in order. All of that is important as we go through a time of some economic slowness. So I can assure you that we will stay in a balanced budget position in Canada. We'll continue to run a surplus, albeit a smaller surplus for the time being. Then there are those that say, well, you should use the surplus for something else. The opposition critics came to meet. I'm going to ignore this, I guess. The opposition critics came. It's too long anyway. The opposition critics came to me when we were preparing the budget, and I met with them as one is supposed to do, and each one of them, the NDP, Jack didn't ride his bicycle; he sent someone else, but the NDP, the Liberals, and the Bloc all came with shopping lists. And this is the old-fashioned way, of looking at how governments run. How much more money can we spend on A, B, C, D, E, big, long lists? How much? Billions of dollars, of course. Billions and billions of dollars. And I said to them, we're close to the line the next couple of years. Have you heard about the world economy, the global economy? Have you heard about the housing recession in the United States? Do you recognize that has certain effects upon our economy and our economic growth in Canada? Nevertheless, here were the presentations of large spending demands. Had I agreed to any of the demands of any of the opposition parties, our budget would be in deficit this year and next year in Canada. So we didn't agree with any of them. But I thank them, despite that, for their support of our efforts in the budget that I announced yesterday. Why are we reducing debt? And it's a good, legitimate question. I'm Happy to see the students here from Riverdale. Let me talk for a moment about reducing debt and why it's important for our country. It's not important in like today's terms or tomorrow morning's terms. It's important in the long run. If we look at Canada and we look at Canada's future, as Sir John A. Macdonald used to say, look a little ahead, my friends. And if we look a little bit ahead, we see how morally deficient it is for us to live high on the hog now and pass our debts on to the next generation. That's you. Why should you pay, students from Riverdale, why should you pay for benefits that we have today because governments are living above their means? Well, we're not doing that anymore. In reports, the IMF and the OECD and so on write reports that call it intergenerational equity. Well, it is intergenerational equity, but it's another way of saying it's not fair to pass on today's debts to the next generation. So we're moving against that. We've paid down so far in 2 years about $37 billion of debt. That's about $1,500, a little bit more than that, $1,500 for every man, woman, and child in Canada. And every time we reduce the public debt, we use what we call the tax-back guarantee, and that is, for the interest we save every time we reduce public debt, we reduce taxes on individuals, families in Canada. That amounts to a significant amount, about $2 billion now, given what we've done so far. So that's reducing debt, reducing taxes. Yesterday we did something that I'm very proud of, actually, and that is the tax-free savings account. I know it's going to take a while for the importance of this initiative to strike people, but in 1957, the government of the day introduced something called the RRSP, which we all sort of take for granted now. There has not been a significant savings initiative tax-wise in Canada since 1957. So we did this yesterday. As I say, it's very significant. It's also not inexpensive. It starts off being inexpensive, but as savings accumulate tax-free in tax-free savings accounts in Canada, it becomes quite expensive over time, 20 years out, something like $3 billion a year. Why are we doing it? We're doing it to encourage savings in Canada. It's sound, conservative, fiscal policy. The United States, the United Kingdom have these types of accounts available, and we did not in Canada. Over time, it will be very significant, not only for young people accumulating tax-free dividends, accumulating tax-free capital gains, accumulating tax-free interest. I tell you, Warren Buffett would love this. It's the miracle of compound interest, tax-free in Canada as we go forward. This is going to become a very popular measure for all Canadians. We estimate that within the next 10 to 20 years, 90% of savings by Canadians will be tax-free in Canada. This is a tremendous impetus toward saving. In terms of other tax measures, yesterday we made an important decision and announced it with respect to the environment, carbon sequestration, a huge capital project. It happens to be in Saskatchewan with respect to carbon sequestration, $240 million that is going to be paid in 2007-2008 in order to move forward with this important project there. In the auto sector in Ontario, we're mindful of the concerns in the auto sector and in the forestry sector. The U.S. recession in the housing market harms those two sectors of our economy dramatically. The Prime Minister in January announced the $1 billion fund, the Community Development Trust, to assist communities, assist workers. We extended yesterday for 3 more years the targeted initiative with respect to older workers. This is to help older workers between the age of 55 and 64. Those ages worry me, actually. I won't retire yet. The initiative to help older workers adjust between the time that they are required to retire and move toward receiving benefits in our older age security system. So we extended that by $90 million over the course of the next 3 years. In the auto sector, this is a matter of some concern. We reduced taxes in October on business generally. The effect on the auto sector is about $1 billion over this and the next 5 years. That's $1 billion. In addition, yesterday we announced $250 million for the Auto Innovation Fund. This is not particularly new, quite frankly. The province of Ontario, when had Conservative government several years ago, and I was the Minister of Economic Development, Alan Rock was the Federal Minister of Industry, we did the same thing, essentially, back then, in order to encourage innovation in the auto sector. Because you know and I know that in Canadian manufacturing, if we're going to succeed, we're going to succeed because we become more competitive. And we're only going to be more competitive if we're more productive. And we're only going to be more productive if we're more technologically sophisticated. So we have to be more innovative. It's as fundamental as that. That's why yesterday we created that fund of $250 million over the next 5 years to assist the manufacturing sector, in addition to $400 million for the new access road at Windsor-Detroit, in addition to $34 million for research into automotive technological issues in Canadian universities. So the total stimulus to the auto sector in Canada is more than $1.5 billion from the Government of Canada. This is important. It's an important industry for us, not only the assemblers, but also the parts manufacturers in Canada. In the forestry sector, this is a time of restructuring in that sector. This is a sector that affects not only Ontario, but British Columbia, Quebec, and other parts of New Brunswick, certainly, other parts of Canada. We are helping, as I say, through the Community Development Trust. We're helping with older workers. But it is a time of restructuring in that industry. The industry will survive. The industry will become, again, a strong Canadian industry. But in the meantime, we're offering that kind of support through research and innovation and development so that it will become a more competitive, a more productive, a more innovative industry in Canada. Now, moving back for a moment and looking at the big picture. You know, we have a strong economy. Our fundamentals are strong. We have the lowest unemployment rate in 33 years in Canada. We also have the highest rate of participation in the Canadian workforce ever. We also have the highest rate of labor mobility ever in Canada. That is, people moving about our country, seeking employment and gaining employment. And yes, we've had some job losses in some sectors of the economy, particularly manufacturing. But what we've seen is that those persons who have had to adjust have adjusted. And they're getting jobs, good jobs, particularly in Ontario, in the expanding financial services sector that are high-paying jobs, good jobs, and that's why that unemployment rate now is at its lowest level in 33 years. As I say, our economic fundamentals are solid. Inflation is low. Interest rates are low. Because of our strong economic fundamentals in terms of monetary policy, the Bank of Canada has room to exercise its monetary jurisdiction with respect to interest rates. As you know, in the last setting of interest rates by the Bank of Canada, the Governor Dodge at that time indicated that it was likely that there'd be some movement with respect to interest rates, further movement by the Bank of Canada in the future, and the new governor, Governor Carney, I'm sure will use his discretion as he moves forward with respect to monetary policy for Canada. Having said all of that, and having ignored what was written for me, I do want to say, in conclusion, and you'll welcome the in conclusion. I'm looking now. I see I've gone on almost as long as it seems. I can tell. I will conclude shortly. We live in a great country. Our economic fundamentals are strong. We have great universities. I see some of the university presidents here today, some of the community college leaders. We have to move forward with a knowledge economy. The strength of Canada in the future, the economic strength, is not going to be to compete in low-level, low-paying jobs with emerging economies. It's going to be to build on our strengths, to build on our people, on the best and the brightest, through our universities, through our colleges. We moved forward again yesterday with that knowledge advantage. We have to recognize that the future of our country is in its people. We have to build the infrastructure we need in this country, which is why we have the largest infrastructure program federally in the history of Canada since the Second World War, more than $33 billion. It's why we created an Office of Public-Private Partnerships so that we can lever that to more than $100 billion in Canada. It's why we've reduced taxes dramatically in our country. It's why fiscally we're being conservative and cautious in our predictions and in our prognostications so that we make sure that our country has balanced budgets. And it's why we're encouraging entrepreneurship in Canada by reducing the tax burden, by reducing the paper burden, by reducing the regulatory burden on small and medium-sized businesses in Canada. So it's all part of the plan. We are fortunate in this country that our economic fundamentals are solid. We are fortunate that our country is united. My friends, my fellow Canadians, we have a brilliant future together. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Flaherty. I should mention that normally we would be having a lunch following the budget with the Minister, but because of the goings-on in the House of Commons right now, he has to be back to Ottawa today for question period, I believe it is. So that's why we ended up with a breakfast today. I'd like to ask Alan Odette to express our appreciation.
I think the breakfast idea is a good one, Catherine. I'm extremely pleased to have the opportunity to thank the Minister of Finance this morning for taking time to be with us. And it was an early morning for all of us. I can't imagine how exhausting it must be to spend months of briefings, discussions, debate leading up to your budget and the busy budget day itself, and then to be out very early the next morning delivering a presentation here in Toronto. So when I say we're grateful to have Minister Flaherty with us here today, we are truly grateful, and thank you kindly for coming. Budgets are tricky. About the only thing you can know for sure is that they never please everyone. I don't envy the Minister of Finance in his job, but I admire the commitment he has shown to it. He's given us a budget that's thoughtful and considered. This morning he's treated both the Canadian and Empire clubs to an articulate analysis of this budget. So on behalf of both our clubs, I want to again thank you for taking time to be here and wish you well over the next couple of days as you head out onto the road to sell your budget. Thank you, and all have a great day.
Every year, the Empire Club of Canada Foundation publishes a book of that year's speeches. Minister Flaherty, we'd like you to accept a copy of our book from the previous year, knowing that your address today will be published in this year's volume. As well, we have for you a copy of a book called Who Said That? And we put this book together at the Empire Club to capture the most memorable thoughts, quotes, and anecdotes of our first 100 years.
Thanks, sir.
The next event of the Empire Club is on February 28th, when we will have the President and CEO of ICICI Bank Canada, Harry Pandey, come to speak to us on India's economic growth and the opportunity coming from that for Canadians. We've also rescheduled our event on Pakistan. We're doing it jointly with the Monk Centre. As you may recall, a few weeks ago we had to postpone it because we're holding it at the Monk Centre at the U of T campus, and they had a snow day. So it is rescheduled for March 4th, and that'll be on our website. On March 20th, we have Richard Stursberg, who I don't know if his local title or his latest title is head of everything at CBC, but he'll be coming. And again, we have a very special event on April 17th with two former U.S. ambassadors to Canada, James Blanchard and Paul Cellucci, who will, of course, one Republican, one Democrat, who will be speaking about the U.S. election. So please join us for these stimulating events. In fact, I hope you'll become a member of the Empire Club of Canada and the Canadian Club of Toronto. You'll find membership applications at your desk and at the reception desk outside. We also have an online reservation service at empireclub.org for your convenience. Today our breakfast is being broadcast on Rogers Live, and it will be repeated. Our meetings are also rebroadcast across Canada on CPAC, and you can view a webcast of today's luncheon on our website at empireclub.org. A couple of other upcoming events that I'd like to flag are Wednesday, April 9th. We have Peter McCarthy, who is chairman of the Canadian Life and Health Insurance Association, also president and CEO of AIG Life Insurance Company of Canada. I know he's only been in that position a relatively short period of time. And a couple of the Canadian Club events upcoming are Wednesday, March 26th, Purdy Crawford, the chairman of Pan-Canadian Investors Committee for third-party ABCP. And on March 31st, Richard Florida, relatively recently arrived in Toronto, director of the Martin Prosperity Institute, Rotman School of Management. On April 7th, the Canadian Club will be having Tony Gagliano and David Pico, who are co-founders of the Luminato Festival, I guess it is, which I guess this will be in its second year this year. So again, join us for all of these events if you can. And thank you so much for being with us today. This meeting is adjourned.